Now I want to talk to you about this. It's one of the most interesting projects I think that you worked on with McQueen, because it throws up a lot of things to do with your work, which is when you move from flat imagery to sculpture and to installation. But it also, I think, really summarises a lot of the ways you work together, playing with things that are quite macabre, quite kind of sinister, and which is the Angels Project, which was part of the festival in Avignon. Tell me more about the history of how this all came about, because I don't know that much about it, and it was quite an interesting, strange...
Okay, well, let's see a little bit. So there's a Millennium Festival in Avignon, a big arts festival in Avignon. A very good curator called Jean de Loisy approached myself and Lee to do a piece for it, and we could have any building within the centre of Avignon, other than the Paper Palace. And so we went down there, we looked around different buildings, and there were some beautiful, beautiful little churches. So then we set about thinking what sort of project we want to do. And we came up with the idea between us of recreating the face of an angel, a Byzantine angel, but making it out of maggots. And you can dye maggots the way they do it for fishing. The maggot industry is an interesting industry. And the maggot itself is an interesting phenomenon. Because without maggots, you don't have life. Maggots take away the disease from death. So when, for instance, a dog dies or a cow dies in the wild, it's the maggots that eat the flesh, and they take away the disease, otherwise it putrefies and it's not good. So maggots actually have a very important point in our ecosystems. And also they often used for things like cleaning wounds. So if you've got a wound, I know it's not a nice thought, but they'll pack maggots around it so they eat away the disease or the rotting flesh and just leave you with a clean living flesh. So they're quite beneficial in that way. They're also used, and there's a big maggot industry, and they're used for dual thing. It's slightly comical, all of this. They're used for dual thing. They're used partly to get rid of waste dead product. So things like dead fish or dead chickens or that sort of thing. You can't just put them in landfills. You can't just throw them in the sea or anything else. So one of the ways they do it is they send them to maggot farms, and the maggots just strip all the flesh off and you're just left with the bone. So you get these funny isn't the word, these huge maggot farms where it's pit after pit after pit after pit of rotting or dead flesh, and all these maggots eating it. And the maggots are then sold to the fishermen. So there's a kind of dual thing. And Lee was a bit of a fisherman, I think, and he certainly knew about maggots, and he knew about different colours of maggots. So we contacted a maggot farmer, a really nice chap actually. He ran a maggot farm in Cambridgeshire, and he came and we met with him and said, okay, we want to recreate, almost like a painting by numbers. So we made this face, and we wanted to recreate the skin tones and the hair and the lips and everything else in different coloured maggots. How possible was that? And we got to a real fine art. This guy was such a talented individual that he would be able to sort of match Pantone by Pantone. So okay, well this skin colour is Pantone number, so we need to feed the maggots this. And the way
what would they feed them to make the dye?
Like a food dye.
Just food dye, okay.
But you feed them when they're really, really young, and the food dye is ingested inside the body. So actually it's not you're painting the maggot on the outside, it's actually taking in the dye inside its body.
And how long does it take it to then become the colour?
It's pretty quick.
So
you can tell quite quickly how you're getting, but the more it grows, of course, the colour diffuses a little bit more. So you have to be a little bit.
An art.
No, there's an art to maggot dyeing, honestly. But the exciting thing is the colour isn't on top of the maggot; it's inside it, so you see it. So it looks, and maggots are very similar to our flesh. They're very similar colour to sort of this sort of colour of flesh. And you see the sort of the way it's very beautiful. You can divorce the fact that it's a sort of weird little grub. I actually just think this is something that's a colour and it moves and it has a sort of opacity to it. It's actually very beautiful. So we made this face, photographed a very beautiful Canadian model, and then divided her face up, did a print of it, divided the face up into all different colours, and then made this huge 3-metre circle like a cookie cutter. So all different areas, all different Pantone colours were divided up, and then we filled it in with the appropriately coloured maggots.
How many maggots in total was it?
I think it was 80 gallons or something. It's a massive amount of maggots.
How did you get them to Avignon?
They all come refrigerated. You have the trick is that you have to keep the maggots between 0 degrees C and 2 degrees C. Otherwise, if you keep it that, otherwise they turn into pupae. They go to chrysalises, and then they start on their journey to becoming flies. So to keep them for any length of time at that, you have to keep them sort of at this cool temperature. So that's how you maintain them. And the idea was you would walk into this church. There was a beautiful little chapel in Avignon, and you'd see in the middle of it a big circular font, like a big silver font.
Yeah.
But of course it would be unclear what it is. And we made it slightly odder by having on the edge of the silver font, we had those things you see in butcher's shops, the sort of blue fluorescent lights, which are fly killers. Yeah. So we had those around the edges. So you had a slightly odd silver and blue thing hovering. And right above it, sort of 20 foot above it, we had this massive circular mirror.
Yeah.
So when you approached it, it was at eye height, so you couldn't see over the top.
Yeah.
So you had no idea what you were looking at. And the only way you could see that the fact that it was a face made of maggots was to look up to the heavens above you, and there you would see this shimmering angel's face. Yeah. But then of course you realise that actually after a while it's moving, it's shimmering because it's actually all living, and then you realise of course because of the smell and everything else that this is actually a huge, 80 gallons of coloured maggots making up this angel's face. So it's a sort of relationship between life and death, and all the sort of our own natural reaction against death, but actually, it's
like beauty and darkness, and there's a lot of those.
A lot of the themes that Lee and I would work on a lot. Yeah. And Bjork made a soundtrack for it. So when you walked into, you had a sort of circular soundtrack. So as you walked around this font, that you would get a sort of a different soundtrack. And Lee made a perfume for Avignon, which was beautiful. So it was all sandalwood and. Not sandalwood, in a frankincense, and so sort of like religious, not sandalwood, slightly religious scent. So it was a really beautiful installation, and we couldn't let it go to flies. Yeah. We couldn't let the whole thing become flies, because otherwise you have 80 gallons of blue bottles of black flies buzzing around Avignon, which I quite like the idea. This sort of black swarm was the end of our piece, but that wasn't going to happen. So we took it back to England and recreated it in England. And let it go to flies, which is where the picture comes from, is all the massive black flies. Yeah.
Where did you do it in England?
At the maggot farm. See, the most appropriate time. At the time, a young photographer called Ben Dunbar Brunton was my assistant. Yeah. And he had to go and he had to take a photograph of this transformation, which took 10 days. Yeah. To go from maggots to flies. And he had to take a photograph every 3 hours. So he spent 10 days. And the only way I could get him to do that was to give him my vintage Aston Martin to drive around the streets because he loved cars. So some sort of benefit for him. But
and how often do you have when you approach people, like, because you do quite a lot in your work, have to approach people who probably have never worked in a fashion context, like someone who runs a maggot farm. Do you find that people tend to be quite open to kind of letting creativity enter their field, even if it's...
Yeah, I think most people are excited to do exciting things. Yeah. So if you approach somebody and say, well, we're going to do this, and it's doing something you've never done before. Yeah. And they normally get it, and it's normally because it's an exciting project. Yeah. And also you're never sure, it's an adventure. Yeah. So most people are happy to embark on that. Most people, if you approach them out of the blue, are really excited to do something new, and also really excited to show off their craft or their skills. Yeah. And the maggot farmer was particularly skillful. Yeah.
And tell me more about working in kind of sculpture and installation, because it's something that you do enjoy doing and you do a lot of recently. Was that one of the first forays that you'd done into kind of installation?
So. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think there's no reason to limit yourself and say, okay, well, I'm a photographer, therefore I just create photographs. You're somebody who has an opinion and you express it through whatever medium you can use. And some of the mediums of sculpture, things I can't chisel a likeness of you out of marble, but I can express myself using physical objects rather than just through a camera. I think it's just that, and partly working with somebody like Alexander McQueen who would push to do things that haven't been done before, and also when the internet came along and Show Studio started, it gave me a platform. To try things out, and to because otherwise the magazine just asked you to do photography, and of course to do new forms of image making and take it into 3D. Yeah. Then what world are you working in? Were you working is a gallery the best place for this sort of stuff, or where do you show it? So Show Studio really allowed me to have a platform to experiment with new forms of work.
That makes sense. And do you remember reaction to it at the time? Because I imagine some people probably found it quite controversial.
It was fraught, to be honest. It was a difficult period because a lot of the installations didn't work. It wasn't quite as well organised as one might have hoped. Yeah. And I think it got reviewed in the press, and people didn't really know how to take it. And I think it was largely an art exhibition. I can't remember the artist there, but the sort of Jeff Koons or they were big artists at the time. And I think there's always, or had been. So then, I think there still is now, a certain reluctance for the art world to embrace the fashion world. Yeah, so it feels that it kind of slightly devalues the art world. Yeah. And a lot about the art world is about keeping that value high. And so when fashion starts to get involved, there's a sort of, they feel there's a devaluing of it. So I think this association between artists and people from the fashion world is often tricky, not so much for the artists or the people from the fashion world, who are indeed also artists in my opinion, but for the people who sell art.
Yeah.
So for the gallery owners who say, okay, well, how do we make this work?
Yeah.
But we've seen great collaboration, Raf Simons and Sterling Ruby, and there are often collaborations with Prada and Rem Koolhaas. Lots of different art, fashion collaborations that work really well. But I think that it's something that the art world finds a little bit difficult.
And they responded quite badly, did they, at the time?
I think it was not badly so much as a sort of a non-understanding of what we were trying to do, because they don't know where to frame it. They've gone to college and they've learned, or they've done all their art critiques. But suddenly this is a new thing, it's a new proposition, it's not clear where it's going. Yeah. It's not clear it's a piece of art that's going to be hung on your wall or put in your room and be sold. It's A, as an installation, B, it's not a sort of painting or a photograph, it's an installation that you can't have, you can't own, it's a moment in time, it's an expression, it's based on language of photography, but it's not really photography. I think people don't really know what to do with it.
Mm. And tell me a little bit, it's interesting, you mentioned Bjork quite briefly, that she was involved kind of with the soundtrack, and there's an interesting kind of collaboration between yourself, McQueen and Bjork that runs for longer than just that one-off project. Just walk me through that as well.
Well, I think similar-minded artists find ways of talking to each other and ways of working together. Yeah. And I think Bjork saw in Lee McQueen and in my work to a certain degree some synergy with hers. Yeah. And we also found that in reciprocal ways. Yeah. So we knew that she was open-minded to projects like this. Yeah. It'd be hard to imagine going to somebody more contemporary now and say, okay, we want to do a soundtrack for a face made of maggots. Yeah. It's not an easy sell. Well, you never know. But it's not an easy thing for people to get their heads around. It's not easy for them to want to participate. But Bjork is the sort of person that would want to participate. And that would be exactly the sort of thing she'd be excited by.
And he'd made clothes for her and stuff as well, hadn't he? Like Homogenic.
And Homogenic was an album cover, which I think we did before that. She actually got her Palme d'Or at Cannes that very summer. So she came up from Cannes to Avignon for Dancer in the Dark. Yeah. And
tell me, do you think that this was one of the, I know you've said before you don't particularly look back at your work kind of and sort of put it in a great narrative, but would you say this is one of the most ambitious projects that you did together?
Yes, I think so. I think it's ambitious in its form. I think it's the theme isn't ambitious, the theme is sort of, all themes are sort of, to try to develop things you already believe in, so in that way it's not ambitious. But I think structurally it was ambitious. Yeah. And I think it's hard when you get out of that zone where you're used to manipulating your craft completely. Yeah. But very useful and very sort of very important to do. I think the idea that you control your craft is great, and I think craftspeople are great. But it doesn't feel that exciting if you know exactly how to do it every time. Whereas it's different opinions. I mean, some people really like the idea that you perfect your craft and you get better and better at fine-tuning your craft. But I actually quite like the idea of trying something I've got no particular knowledge of doing. So whether it be making sculpture or painting.
Also, you like working with mistakes, and I guess doing something where you actually have no control over things turning out in a different way. Yeah. The maggots not dyeing the correct right colour, or one of them wandering into the wrong section.
Which they did quite a lot, yes.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yes. That's interesting. And just tell me as well, like in the narrative of yours and McQueen's collaborative relationship, where did this fit in, and did it influence other work, or was it influenced by the work? We talked about how the themes were very similar. I don't know how much it influenced us in general. I think it became something that we felt we could do more. Yeah. So we were freeing ourselves up from the restraints of being a fashion designer and a print photographer. Yeah. So it was part of a journey of sort of say, okay, we can do anything we want. We can tackle any particular form we want to tackle. We started to get recognition or interest from the art world. People asked us to do exhibitions and that sort of thing. As I said in other interviews, Lee was never particularly, for him his work was his art, fashion was his art. So he wasn't looking to have a gallery to show that, because he already had the platform. Yeah. So he was never on the same trajectory as a lot of artists are, where they're going they need a platform, they need a gallery, they need an agent to show their work. But actually he was doing his fashion shows in front of the world in any case. So he had his platform. Yeah, he very much did. Thanks, Nick.
Pleasure.